Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, February 28th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Israel refuses to leave the Philadelphi corridor. So Israel will not withdraw its troops from the Philadelphi corridor, which is a strip of land that runs along the border of Gaza and Egypt. And this is a violation of the Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal between Israel and Hamas. Israel's refusal to leave is a violation of that deal. Under the agreement, Israel is required to leave the corridor this Saturday, which marks the end of the first phase of the ceasefire deal. But an Israeli official said on Thursday that won't happen. According to Haaretz, an Israeli official said, quote, "We will not withdraw from the Philadelphia route. We will not allow Hamas murderers to roam our border again with trucks and rifles, and we will not let them rearm through smuggling," end quote. So Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz compared the occupation of the Philadelphia corridor to the Israeli occupation of southern Syria and southern Lebanon. He said, quote, "The Philadelphia axis will remain a buffer zone just as is the case in Lebanon and Syria," end quote. So Katz also claimed that he had evidence that Hamas was planning attacks on Israeli soldiers, which Hamas denied. Hamas also said that the continued Israeli occupation of the Philadelphia corridor was a clear violation of the ceasefire. Hamas said, quote, "Katz's statements about keeping the border area between Gaza and Egypt as a buffer zone are a clear violation of the ceasefire agreement and an attempt to fabricate pretexts to disrupt and derail it," end quote. So Israel captured the Philadelphia corridor in May 2024 when it launched its assault on the southern Gaza city of Rafah. It captured the Rafah border crossing. It captured this corridor. If you remember at the time, Biden was claiming, oh, we're only going to support a limited incursion into Rafah, but Israel left that city just in complete ruin. If you see pictures of Rafah today, it's just completely destroyed. So during ceasefire negotiations last year, Netanyahu repeatedly sabotaged the talks by demanding that Israel maintain control of this corridor. But under this new deal, they're supposed to be gone by Saturday, and this is just another Israeli violation of this deal. And so where things stand right now, Egypt said on Thursday that mediators are in Cairo, officials from Hamas and Israel are there. There are negotiations happening on the second phase of the ceasefire deal, and that was, these negotiations were supposed to start at the beginning of the month, but Israel kept delaying it. And, the first phase is ending Saturday. So now Hamas is saying that they're willing to extend the first phase of the ceasefire. That's something that Israel's been suggesting, but Hamas is saying that they still want a full Israeli withdrawal. So a Hamas official said, quote, "Hamas is ready for an extension based on the established red lines, the end of the war, a full Israeli withdrawal, and a respectable prisoner exchange deal, and the beginning of the reconstruction process in Gaza," end quote. So things are very much up in the air right now. We've seen all these threats from Israeli officials. Katz said that they're preparing to restart the genocidal campaign in Gaza. Netanyahu has threatened this repeatedly, and the U.S. has basically said that they're willing to support Israel no matter what they do here. So these next few days, this weekend, really going to keep an eye on the situation with the negotiations, the situation in Gaza, and just hope that some kind of deal is made to keep the ceasefire deal going, even though, as we have covered a lot on this show, Israel continues to kill Palestinians in Gaza. They've killed over 100 since the ceasefire went into effect on January 19th. But, man, I just can't imagine things going back the way they were a few months ago with the bombing campaign and the full siege and everything. All right, so the next one here, Palestinians released by Israel show signs of torture and starvation. So this is a Al Jazeera article here, and I mean, I saw some pictures and videos of some of these Palestinians who were released from jail and looking really, really rough. So hundreds of Palestinians held in Israeli jails released in Gaza as part of the ceasefire agreement once again showed signs of emaciation and abuse. More than 600 Palestinians were released on Thursday, shortly after Israel and Hamas handed over coffins containing the bodies of 4 captives. Israel has delayed the release of 2 Palestinian women and 44 children. It was the final scheduled swap as part of the first phase of the ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel. Several Palestinians were transported in ambulances to the European hospital in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza due to the severity of their injuries. Many Palestinians were also sent to Egypt and the occupied West Bank. Ala al-Bayari, a Palestinian released to Gaza City, told Al Jazeera that he witnessed torture, beating, humiliation, and everything you can imagine while in Israeli prisons. He met his 1-year-old daughter for the first time after he got out. He said, quote, "We were kept naked, water was thrown on us, and then they used electricity to torture them," end quote. And we've seen all these reports about them sticking like metal rods, in places, and this really sick, horrendous stuff. And you just hear nothing about this in the Western U.S. media, about the conditions of these Palestinians. You know, and a lot of the ones who were released as part of this exchange were just rounded up in Gaza. And, you know, they've detained medical workers and tortured them as well. I mean, it's just absolutely horrendous. Yahya Shrida, a Palestinian prisoner who was released to Ramallah, described Israeli prisons as graveyards. He told Reuters, quote, "We have been taken out of suffering. It was as if we had been dug out of our own graves. No prisoner has had the experience of having their own release delayed twice. What we have been through is a situation that the mountains can't carry. It is very hard to explain. It is very hard to talk about what we have been through," end quote. Some Palestinians returned with their limbs cut off, and others were suffering from severe injuries due to Israeli torture. And I remember there were some stories about how the way that they were keeping Palestinians with binds on their arms, and in some cases that they had to amputate their arms because of the way that they were keeping them like shackled up. Just these horrific stories coming out of these torture prisons that the Palestinians have been kept in. All right, so the next one here. IDF report on October 7th identifies several Israeli failures. So this one's from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So an inquiry by the Israeli Defense Forces into the October 7th Hamas attack identified several failures by the military. Many of the results of the investigation have previously been reported. The probe found the Israeli military only had 1 drone flying over Gaza on October 7th and no fighter aircraft ready to respond to Hamas in southern Israel. The lack of military hardware in the region prevented the IDF from moving more quickly. The lack of aircraft prepared to engage with Hamas was a result of an incorrect Israeli assessment that the Palestinian resistance group was unwilling to engage the IDF in a large-scale war. So this is what the military is saying, is that they were unprepared because they didn't take the threats seriously. Another thing that they mentioned was that, I'm not sure if this was actually in the report, but we know, and there was Israeli media reports on this report that said that the IDF ordered the Hannibal Directive, which what is the policy of preventing an Israeli from being taken hostage by any means necessary, even if that means killing them. And historically, this was applied to soldiers, but on October 7th, they ordered what they called a mass Hannibal, and it also applied to the Israeli civilians, and they unloaded on these cars going back into Gaza. So there was a little more about that came out. Not really anything we didn't know, but it was just more confirmation of that essentially. So this is what the Israeli military is saying basically, is that they were completely unprepared for this. And of course, many people are, there's a lot of suspicion that, you look at Gaza, it's one of the most heavily surveilled places on earth. How could they not have seen this coming? Was there some kind of stand down order? I think those things are possible, but we really don't, have confirmation of that. But you just look at how big this attack was and the hours that it took the Israeli military to respond. There's definitely some suspicious things there. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. gives Israel the green light to stay in Lebanon. So this one's from Jason Ditz. Israel's decision to continue to occupy territory in southern Lebanon beyond the February 18th deadline came without a lot of official comment from the U.S. But now Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz is saying that the U.S. gave them a green light to remain militarily in Lebanon indefinitely. So Israel is saying the U.S. gave them the okay to occupy southern Lebanon indefinitely. And they're occupying these 5 outposts, essentially these 5 military bases that they've established in southern Lebanon. Israeli media was reporting around the deadline that the U.S. was backing the continued occupation of 5 surveillance posts inside Lebanon. The U.S. never directly confirmed that, however, and Israel remains in Lebanon. Just came and went without official U.S. comment. So the ceasefire ending the Israeli invasion of Lebanon meant to provide a 60-day window for Israeli withdrawal, which would have ended January 26th. The U.S. guaranteed that Israel would be out by then, but then later endorsed extending the deadline to February 18th. And then February 18th came, and they withdrew from the villages that they were occupying, but they have not pulled out all the way, and now the U.S. hasn't commented. But again, Israel's saying that they got the green light. And I'm sure that that's the case. The U.S., of course, with all the support, military aid that they give Israel, this means that the U.S. is supporting this Israeli occupation, indefinite Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. Same thing over in southern Syria, where it seems like Israel continues to push further in. So just occupation after occupation here. All right, so the next one here, Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich to visit Washington. So Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, one of the more extreme members of the Israeli government, will travel to Washington in the coming days to meet U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. His visit could have significant implications for U.S. policy toward Israel's goal of annexing the occupied West Bank. Smotrich is an outspoken proponent of the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and the reestablishment of Jewish settlements in the Strip. He is known for his genocidal rhetoric. He has previously said that it may be moral and justified for Israel to starve to death 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. He's actually said that, just flat out. And according to the Times of Israel, the Biden administration had a tacit policy of boycotting Smotrich and other extremist ministers such as Itamar Ben-Gvir. He's not in the government anymore. He quit because of the ceasefire deal. But, you know, this is something that Biden did to kind of push this narrative that they were opposing things Israel did. He was critical of Ben-Gvir publicly. And apparently they didn't want them to visit the U.S. But the Biden administration also gave Israel everything that it needed to fulfill to achieve the goals of guys like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. You know, the destruction, the genocide in Gaza, and the advancement of settlements in the West Bank. You know, that all went on. The things that these guys want all happened with all those bombs that Biden shipped to Israel. So Smotrich also holds a ministerial position in the defense ministry, which gives him the ability to expand settlements in the West Bank. A settler himself, Smotrich has long been on the record calling for the Israeli annexation of the territory of the West Bank we're talking about here. And he has said that President Trump's second term in office gives Israel the opportunity to advance that goal. Smotrich has also praised President Trump's plan for the U.S. to take over Gaza, which would require an ethnic cleansing. Earlier this month, Smotrich claimed that Trump's plan to displace Palestinians from Gaza would begin within weeks. He said that the ethnic cleansing is going to start a few weeks from now. So the news of Smotrich's visit comes as the Gaza hostage and ceasefire deal is incredibly fragile amid continued Israeli violations. Smotrich has threatened to quit the government if Israel does not restart the genocidal war after the first phase, which again ends on Saturday. And Smotrich has claimed that he got this guarantee from Netanyahu that after the first phase, they would restart military operations with the goal of taking over the entire Gaza Strip. He wants to expel all the Palestinians, and he's going to get a warm welcome in Washington, D.C., I'm sure. And I'm sure we're going to see him meet with members of Congress. I think it's going to be really kind of sickening to see that, a guy like this, the way people are going to greet him. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of protesters, though, as well. All right, so the next one here, U.S. and Russian diplomats hold talks in Istanbul. So U.S. and Russian diplomats held talks in Istanbul on Thursday about the issues impacting the work of their respective embassies as Washington and Moscow are looking to get diplomatic relations back on track. According to the Russian news agency TASS, the talks ended after 6.5 hours. Valentina Matvienko, the Speaker of the upper house of Russia's parliament, said that the talks should help restore the full-fledged work of the U.S. and Russian diplomatic missions. She said, quote, "I'm sure that the agreements will be reached and we will return to civilized communication, which was disrupted by the previous administration," end quote. So the talks in Istanbul followed a meeting in Saudi Arabia on February 18th that involved high-level U.S. and Russian officials, including Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. During that meeting, the two sides agreed to normalize relations and work to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. So Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Thursday that the renewed dialogue between the U.S. and Russia inspires certain hopes. He said, quote, "There is a reciprocal determination to work toward the restoration of relations between the two countries, a gradual solution of the colossal backlog of systemic strategic problems in the world architecture," end quote. He was very complimentary of the new U.S. administration. He said that the current U.S. leadership has demonstrated, quote, "pragmatism, a realistic view of things, and are abandoning many stereotypes, the so-called rules and messianic ideological cliches of their predecessors, which essentially were the reasons that led to the crisis of the entire system of international relations," end quote. So while both Putin and Trump seem eager to reduce tensions and work on building relations, it remains unclear how the war is going to end. And Trump just said the other day, basically, that they're going to keep giving the weapons to Ukraine as long as the war goes on. So hopefully some kind of deal is reached soon, but I just really don't see what it could be exactly. And the next one here, Starmer says the UK is ready to put boots on the ground in Ukraine. So while visiting President Trump at the White House on Thursday, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said he was ready to put boots on the ground in Ukraine to provide security guarantees as part of a potential future peace deal. Starmer said, quote, "I'm clear that the UK is ready to put boots on the ground and planes in the air to support a deal, working together with our allies because that is the only way peace will last," end quote. So Starmer and Macron, they've really been pushing for this idea of deploying troops to Ukraine, even though Russia has repeatedly rejected it. Trump claimed that Putin said he had no problem with this idea, but the Kremlin denied that was the case, and we've just seen lots of rejection from Russia about this idea. But Starmer is all about it, and President Trump was asked by reporters if the U.S. would intervene if British troops in Ukraine came under attack, and he was kind of being a little funny in his answer. Basically, he said the British could take care of themselves, but that he would help them if they needed. He said, quote, "If they need help, I'll always be with the British, okay? But they don't need help. The British have incredible soldiers, incredible military, and they can take care of themselves," end quote. So according to Politico, during the closed-door meetings, Starmer was expected to ask Trump if the U.S. could provide what he's calling a backstop for the European deployment to Ukraine, meaning support with aerial intelligence, and also potentially air cover, air support if Russia attacks. So this means he's planning for the possibility of Russia attacking and engaging in combat with Russia, despite the risk of nuclear war. I mean, it's kind of completely insane, if you ask me. So I just don't think that there's any realistic way of this happening, of this deployment happening, of Russia going for anything like this. But Starmer's not dropping it. And Trump is saying he's also basically into the idea. He's, about this European deployment to Ukraine. So I don't know. Another thing that happened while they were meeting in the White House is Trump, it looked like he walked back his labeling of Zelensky as a dictator over the lack of elections in Ukraine. He was asked about the comment and said, "Did I say that? I can't believe I said that," when he was asked if he still considers Zelensky to be a dictator. And he's hosting Zelensky on Friday, and they're going to sign the mineral deal, and it's just going to get the U.S. more bogged down in Ukraine, it seems like. All right, so the next one here, here's some good news. The NED confirms that its funding has been suspended. So the National Endowment for Democracy, the NED, which is a U.S.-funded organization that meddles in elections and pushes regime change around the world in the name of spreading democracy, has confirmed reports that its funding from the U.S. government has been frozen, forcing it to suspend operations. The NED said in a statement on Tuesday, quote, "The NED is currently unable to access its congressionally appropriated funds, which sustain nearly all of its grant-making and operations. As a result, for the first time in the organization's 4-decade history, it has been unable to meet its obligations and has been forced to suspend support for nearly 2,000 partners worldwide," end quote. While the NED presents itself as an independent organization, it is nearly entirely funded by the U.S. government, which it acknowledged in this statement. The NED claimed that its funding should have been exempt from the Trump administration's pause on foreign aid. The NED said, quote, 95% of NED's funding is directly appropriated by Congress and is not considered foreign assistance. This funding, therefore, was not subject to the executive order freezing foreign assistance for a 90-day review. However, despite being exempt, access to these funds has been inexplicitly cut off, forcing NED to halt all partner support and furlough the majority of its staff, end quote. This means Victoria Nuland's probably lost her paycheck from the NED. I'm sure she's got some other paychecks, but, you know, at least she's losing something. And, you know, the thing I always point to when we talk about the NED and how it presents itself as this kind of pro-democracy, standing up for human rights around the world type organization. There's an interview, kind of notorious interview now from 1991, where Alan Weinstein, who was a co-founder of the NED, told the Washington Post that a lot of what the NED does was done covertly by the CIA before the NED was established. And that includes providing money and moral support for what they call pro-democracy groups, training resistance fighters, and working to subvert communist rule. And this was, you know, when they were speaking specifically about its work against the Soviet Union. And so, you know, there's all sorts of, the list goes on. You know, one thing recently, there was that regime change in Bangladesh. The Gray Zone had a good report about how the NED was funding these groups, opposition groups there. You know, this stuff still goes on all around the world. So the fact that it's paused now is good. And I hope that they don't get their funding back. Again, the fact that Victoria Nuland works there should be a reason enough alone to oppose giving them money. All right, so the next one here, Trump to cut 90% of USAID contracts and fire more staffers. So this one is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. A memo circulating in the Trump administration says the president plans to eliminate 90% of USAID foreign aid programs, and an official in the agency said that there are many more terminations coming. So this is big. I mean, cutting 90%, you know, the USAID does similar things, meddling and intervention in countries across the world. A lot of this stuff from USAID and NED was you know, key in the 2014, the Maidan in Ukraine and the coup that ousted Yanukovych. And this stuff is very nefarious. So, you know, this is one thing I remember when Elon Musk was talking about Doge at first. And I think Ron Paul wrote a column, you know, talking about saying how this stuff should be cut. And that's what I was thinking, that it would be good to cut stuff like this. So I'm happy that this is happening. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like there's any military spending cuts going to happen. And I think there's a chance with some of the things that we see from the Trump administration that they're going to kind of might try to privatize some of this stuff, make it less transparent, make it more secretive than it is. Because, you know, I just can't see Marco Rubio not wanting stuff like this, you know, this type of intervention to still be going on in some form. So I think there is a risk of something like that. But I mean, a 90% cut to USAID contracts is significant. And, you know, there's a chance that they might cut it and then review them and then pick ones that they like. You know, I don't know exactly how this is going to go, but definitely big cuts here. All right, so the next one here, hysteria after the IAEA issues report on Iran. So this one's from Jason Ditz. So the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, has issued its quarterly report on Iran's civilian nuclear program. And like clockwork, media outlets responded with hysterical speculation about Iranian nuclear weapons, despite this report being not materially different from recent quarterly reports. Basically, their stockpile of 60% enriched uranium has grown, and that's because they're not really using it for anything. They've basically taken the step to enrich the 60% uranium to get leverage in potential negotiations, and they initially did it in 2021 in response to a covert Israeli attack. But I mean, you see the headlines. Fox News has a big headline saying that Iran has enough enriched uranium for 6 nuclear bombs. But the thing is that to make nuclear weapons, they need the uranium to be enriched at least 90%. So this 60%, they can't make a bomb with it, yet they're saying, oh, they have this X amount stockpiled, and that's enough material for 6 bombs, but they can't actually make bombs with the 60%. So it's just total hysteria. And, you know, this comes with all this talk about Israel potentially bombing Iran and Trump increasing the sanctions. And I think Trump falls for this stuff because he did pull out of the Iran nuclear deal in 2018. You know, so it seems like he just buys into all this propaganda, this fear mongering about Iran's civilian nuclear program. All right, so the next one here, Trump will not say if the U.S. would defend Taiwan. So President Trump on Wednesday declined to say whether or not the U.S. would defend Taiwan if China attacked the island. The president was asked if he would make it his policy to ensure that China never takes Taiwan by force, and he replied, quote, "I never comment on that. I don't comment because I don't ever want to put myself in that position," end quote. So for decades, the U.S. has maintained a policy known as strategic ambiguity related to the potential defense of Taiwan, where it would not say one way or the other if the U.S. would intervene. The purpose of strategic ambiguity is to avoid antagonizing China and emboldening, and it's also, there's another aspect of it. It's not just about China, it's also about Taiwan. If Taiwan thinks that the U.S. will definitely intervene, it might make them more, you know, emboldened, and you know, they might do more to provoke China. So it's good to see Trump say this because President Biden broke from strategic ambiguity. Several times he declared, yes, that he would defend Taiwan if China attacked. And what's the implication there is war with a nuclear power. But, you know, that didn't stop him from repeatedly saying it. So by not commenting, Trump is returning to the policy of strategic ambiguity, although his administration is stacked with China hawks and is expected to continue increasing military and diplomatic support for Taiwan. Trump also said that the U.S. is going to have a good relationship with China, although he is significantly ramping up the trade war. Marco Rubio was also asked about this, and he said that the U.S. would work to prevent China from attacking Taiwan, basically hinting that the military aid, the weapon sales, the military support, all that stuff is going to continue and possibly ramp up. And they do this in the name of deterrence, but China's actions have showed that it makes war more likely. You know, China's really stepped up its military activity around Taiwan in response to the U.S. increasing support for Taiwan in recent years. So the tensions, I think, will continue to rise, but at least the president's not out there saying, yeah, we're going to go to war with China if they attack Taiwan. So anyway, the last story here, jailed PKK leader calls for the Kurdish group to dissolve. So this one's from the Cradle. This is an interesting story here. Abdullah Öcalan, the jailed leader of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, called on February 27th in a highly anticipated video statement for his party to lay down its weapons and dissolve itself. Öcalan said that the PKK has completed its life like its counterparts and made its dissolution necessary. He said, quote, "The language of the period of peace and democratic society must also be developed in accordance with reality. In this climate created by the call made by Turkish MP and the will shown by the president of Turkey, Erdogan, and the positive approaches of other political parties towards the known call, I call for laying down arms and assuming the historical responsibility of this call," end quote. So apparently he's been happy with what Erdogan has been saying, I guess, offering the Kurds. I'm not sure exactly what these talks have involved. But this could have big implications for the situation in northern Syria, because you have the PKK's wing, the YPG, their wing in Syria, which is part of the SDF, which is the U.S.-backed force. They've been fighting against Turkey and Turkish factions in the north. So that maybe there's a chance that there could be some kind of peace here. In response to the statement, Erdogan said, oh, actually, no, this isn't a statement from Erdogan. This is a statement from his party. The Justice and Development Party said, quote, Turkey will be freed from its shackles if the terrorist organization responds to this call and lays down its arms and dissolves itself, end quote. So Öcalan has been in prison since 1999. He's serving life in prison. The PKK has been involved in an armed struggle against Turkey for decades. They're considered a terrorist organization by Turkey, also by the U.S. and the EU, even though the U.S. backs them in Syria. You know, being a terrorist organization doesn't stop you from getting support from the U.S., obviously. Anyway, there's a chance here, and Öcalan saying that he's working on a peace plan for the feud between the Kurds and Turkey, and he's expected to present this peace plan soon. Possibly before the Kurdish New Year in March. So this could happen soon. And hopefully some kind of peace is reached here. I mean, you know, that would be great considering all the violence that's happened in North Syria. Iraq, too. Turkey bombs the Kurds in Iraq all the time. Kind of a conflict that's just always been going on that people, you don't really hear about too much. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Gregory Shupak. The media is afraid to call ethnic cleansing by its name. One from M. Reza Benem, Manifest Destiny in the Histories of the U.S. and Israel. One from Ted Snyder, Trudeau's parting gift to Ukraine is a mistake. One from Spencer Neely, Not My Magaza. So it's a play on MAGA and Gaza combined together. And our spotlight is from Ruaida Amir, Israel replicating West Bank checkpoints in Gaza. So please go check all that out. This is the last show for the week, so I hope everyone has a good weekend. You could always support us by sharing, liking, subscribing. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Follow us on social media, on Instagram, on X. We just crossed 10,000 followers on TikTok, so that's been growing pretty good. It's basically just clips of this show, short clips from this show. Anyway, that's it. I will be back in a few days again. I hope everybody has a good weekend. Thanks for listening.